For all the country's progress, barriers to social justice and economic equity exist in far too many corners of this society. Too many of our fellow brothers and sisters have died, sacrificed, and suffered at the illness that is racism. The 100 Black Men of Syracuse decided it's time for us to step out differently. How can we further the conversation to re-examine and create a more empathetic and inclusive society, one conversation at a time?
Well, first, good to be with you. I'd like to thank the 100 Black Men for giving me an opportunity to participate in this series. I chose the city of Syracuse because it fit a model that I prefer as it relates to a backdrop of being a police chief. It's a mid-sized city, it's an urban environment, diverse community, and mid-sized police department. My back in Louisville, where I spent 21 years, was with a major city of about 700,000 people. And I've always preferred a mid-sized city and department because it gives you an opportunity to have a more intimate relationship because of the size. Being an outside chief does have its advantages and disadvantages. I will start first with the advantages. The advantages is that I have a perspective of two other states, two other police departments, and everything that I've learned along those 25 years or so prior to coming here. So it gives me an opportunity to look at some of our historical challenges through a different lens. And I would say that that's beneficial, particularly if you're your predecessor who had been in the position for nearly a decade. It's very easy to look at some of the things that you're challenged with, and maybe I would see it differently. As someone who replaced me in Little Rock would feel the same way of me being there for 5 years. Disadvantages is I have to learn the people, who's genuine, who has an agenda, who is trying to assist us in moving the ball down the field, learning the blind spots of the community, learning what's sensitive to that community. Some of that you get through bumps and bruises. Some of that people can direct you away from turbulence, but that's some of the disadvantages of going into a city as an outside chief. One of the first things that I did in my early tenure was to divide the city into 3 divisions. The purpose of that is to, first of all, I wanted the commanders to be responsible for a geographical area 24 hours a day, whereas in the past they were responsible for a shift. The other positive of that is that both the police and community would develop a more intimate relationship because you would have the same people riding the same area and responsible for those areas as it relates to accountable to the chief's office. In doing so, there are a number of programs that we have with the goal in mind of having constructive contact with the public. Both internal and external, we developed advisory groups. From the community standpoint, there's one in each of the divisions, which is the North Division, Southeast, and Southwest. And they have an opportunity to bring things directly to the chief staff when we meet with them once a month to go over some of the things that are troubling in their community, or that they feel that they need help, or they're getting to run around. A sense of urgency that we can learn directly from the people who are helping us move that ball down the field. As it relates to youth, we have 10 police officers in our public schools, 2 in each of the 5 high schools, and then we have 1 officer in the DARE program, and then the other in a GREAT program, which is drug and gang prevention. Those are the constructive, formal relationships that we have with youth. We also do many different projects or programs that we participate in them. Again, trying to have that intentional contact with the youth. Obviously, with school being out right now and with COVID going on, most recently we did something as simple as we had an ice cream truck that we paid for to come up to the kids. With poverty being 32% in our community, we don't want to take for granted that everyone can afford ice cream off of that truck. And it gives us an opportunity for those kids to see us doing something other than force, pulling out our handcuffs, or taking someone from their home. And that's the second time that we've done that this summer. Small as it relates to the problems, in comparison to the problems that we have facing our country and our city today, but it's an intentional behavior on our part to constructively interact with our youth. Well, the first thing I would do is I would respectfully push back on any notion that black lives don't matter to the police. The same way that I think that it is a significant error on anyone's part to broad brush black people, brown people in our country. I think that any objective person would know that you can't broad brush an entire profession or an entire police department. The fact of the matter is the vast majority of the men and women who come to work every day are just like your family. I can assure you that when you meet with your family, there's someone that's not allowed to use the bathroom upstairs. It's the same thing with the police department. The vast majority of them do what they're supposed to do, and then I have a few that I would like to push out of the department yesterday. But I'm accepting of that. But to say that there's not problems between our profession and things that we've seen in our black and brown community, first of all, we have to walk to the podium and take responsibility for what has been done and what we continue to see. Just as short as 2 days ago in, I can't remember the city in Wisconsin, but we just saw that 2 days ago. So another reminder of each time we pull the scab off of this painful scar that too often we're seeing force that is highly questionable in black and brown communities. Once we take ownership for that, we have to genuinely work to be able to address some of those issues. I think that starts with hiring the right people, making sure that they are appropriately trained, making sure that we hold them accountable. And then my job is to walk that tightrope of ensuring that we're providing the kind of professional service that our community deserves, while at the same time supporting our officers when they're right, and then holding them accountable when they're wrong. First of all, this feels different. I'm in my 28th year of this profession, and this feels different. I've seen frustration before. I've seen activism before. I've seen people get excited before, but it's different. And one of the biggest things that makes this different, and I would liken it only to probably the civil rights movement, and then probably from a police incident standpoint, I would mirror it with the Rodney King incident, because it's probably the second time, at least in my professional life, that suburban white America has said, I didn't know that was going on. Because at the beginning of Eric Floyd's video, he was alive, pleading for his life. And you watched a uniformed police officer murder him while 4 other officers did nothing to stop it in broad daylight, while he knew he was being recorded. So anyone that thinks that this is going to be kind of a flash in the pan, I think this is different because different people appear to be upset about the service that's being provided to our citizens. There has been some blowback on all of us because of what has happened, because part of us are frustrated that we're having protests in Syracuse for something that happened in another city, in Minneapolis. But the problem is the respective communities around the country, the reason that they protested is because they said, well, we've been telling you that for 30 years. That's where the anger comes from. People always go back to the incident. It's the pre-existing conditions that happened before he was killed that makes it boil over, because they've been complaining about that for decades. That's where the anger comes from. I've heard, I can't tell you how many rumors about our recruiting, our hiring process when I came on board. I will tell you that I've had probably 15 or 20 or so, and the common denominator being black. Individuals come up to me and say, I tried to apply for the police department, I was put out for this reason, or I didn't make it through for that reason. I've heard stuff from other people who would say that, well, this person was put out because their family had someone in their family that had a criminal background. I've heard many of those stories. One of the things that I did since I've been here is I have a very intimate role in our hiring process. And I can tell you that the vast majority of the people that we lose in our process, regardless of race or gender, happen during the background portion. I'll pause on that. As far as who we recruit, we go to her point, military installations, we go to campuses, we go to high schools, we go to job fairs, we're at the mall, we have a website, we have social media, a plethora of different avenues we use to attempt to get people in this profession. It's just a very difficult profession to recruit from. Our background and our process, I would say it's a solid process. We're in the process right now of having an expert look at it from top to bottom and give us some recommendations on how we can improve it. But I can tell you that in looking in the background portions, when I stepped into the process to where now every person that is signed off, which is a formal term of the person agrees to withdraw themselves or we sign them out of the process, has my approval. There are no cases to where John Doe can say, well, I was put out for this reason and they didn't tell me anything. No. Every person that leaves the process since I've been here, December of 2018, has had my name on it. And I can tell you exactly why we didn't hire that individual. The problem with many of our black and brown youth is that too many of them have made mistakes in their young adult life that are unforgiving. You can go and do something else. You can go and be a doctor. You can go and be a dentist. You can go to even to college. But some of the self-admission, some of the criminal backgrounds things, the drug usage across all races. These kids, they've tried every drug that you can think of. Very, very, very laxed about drugs with this group of individuals. And it's very, very difficult to get, for example, each time the mayor has given me an opportunity to hire for my full contingency, which is normally in the areas of high 30s, low 40s. For no class, when I had a blank check to hire for all of my vacancies, have I been able to fill up the academy. Not one time. And it's because we have a decreased pool. When I came on the police department, there were about 3,000 people that went through the process for our 36 recruits that ultimately were hired. 3,000. Today, we're lucky to have 300 or 400 for a class, and that's how we end up with 30. And we've modified some of the requirements, not to lower our threshold or our standard, but to be more flexible with if someone have you used marijuana within the past year? I can't tell you how many people will say, well, when was the last time you used? It was 2 days ago. You can't be the police. And please don't go out here and tell your family that you don't know why you would need to hire you. You know why. You know exactly why. So many of these things that are put into the universe, I'm not saying that they didn't happen. I'm not saying that our process is not in need of improvement, but I can tell you that I can vouch for and I stand on everyone that was hired and denied during my tenure. And I can intelligently defend any person that didn't make it through our process. Well, the percentage is about 10% live outside the city. And our goal was to include that in our most recent contract that we presented to our Common Council that was voted down, and they had the reasons as to why they did that. We will, in the near future, be taking that contract before an arbitrator to see if we can get it through. One of the concessions that the city made, and with the, when I say the city, I mean City Hall, was for this significant financial raise that was given to them and other benefits, was that the union had to agree to do the residency requirement. I publicly and privately always said that I believe that as a chief of police, I should live in the city that employs me. I've also said that I think that officers should have a right to raise their family wherever they choose. On the other side of that coin, I think that there is significant value in knowing your police officer. You're less likely to mistreat someone if you attend the same church. You're less likely to say something unprofessional to a child if your kids go to school with that child. So I see the value in police officers living in the community. I think that we're more likely to see that increase when people voluntarily do it. So I think incentives are a good way to do that, and some cities across the country have tried that. I will tell you that on a good day, with $100 bills in my hand and ice cream in the other, it's difficult for me to recruit for this profession. Think of what we've seen in protests and reform, everything that's been said, right, wrong, or indifferent, and then I'm having to walk into the homes of 21 and 23-year-old black and brown kids and say, disregard everything that you've seen on the news. We'd like for you to come with us. After everything that we just said, some right, some valid, everything that we just said about this profession, now we're telling this kid, come with us. Now, some will be inspired by what they've seen with the protests, and they'll say, I'll be a part of change. Many will say, no, thank you. I understand both sides of that. Law enforcement's been good to me. I can't think of anything else that I would rather do, but it will continue to be a struggle for us to recruit black and brown kids and women. They certainly make up that minority group. But I can also tell you lastly that it's important that recruiting be a community responsibility. People have to feel like that they're welcome in the community, that you want to see them in the profession. And if you have friends, family who are considering going into the profession, it's important that they have the support of their families to do a very difficult job. Well, I believe last year, I believe we spent about $8.2 million. So there was a slight reduction in our overtime spending from the year previous of 2018 being the comparison. Overtime for us is a significant issue. I will tell you that some of it is contractual, where we're required to pay overtime in some examples. I do also feel like that there are some instances where we have a culture of entitlement that has always had overtime and kind of a blank check to be able to work on an overtime basis. But when you have a city that is each year spending part of its reserve to balance the budget, we can't continue to go out and buy a new house or new car or new bikes for our kids when you know that your department, when your city is leaking money. The two just don't match up. So even though we do a very valuable job in public safety, we have to recognize and pivot with the rest of the city to know that we have to do things differently. We put measures in place to attempt to try to reduce that overtime. Part of that is getting the technology in place so that I can better make decisions about the money that's being spent, because right now some of the systems that we have are very archaic and much Much of it is manually done. That's not good in a 21st century of technology that's out there. So we're working on that. As far as the need for the overtime, there are many times that we have issues that are going on. For example, if we have a parade or a special event, all of these events are accustomed to having police there at the event, and many of those events is done on overtime. Well, if I say to the organizer of the sickle cell anemia 3K walk that next year you're going to have, if you want officers, you have to pay for that, well, what do you think they're going to say? So if everyone wants me to tighten my budget, then we need to tighten up what you ask police to do, because there are many things that you send police to do that I don't think the police should be the first responder. So our community, and we're getting ready to see some of this, we're going to have to reimagine what we ask of police if we want police to operate within a different financial box, because we can't continue to give you the services that we've been given and also reduce our budget. You're never going to hear me say we're going to do more with less. That sounds good and it looks good on a t-shirt, but it's not in the real world how things go. So if we have less money, you're going to see less from your police department. The biggest hurdle for that, and I would put this in terms of, I grew up a Baptist and in the church. And if you have a church of 100 members, when the pastor needs something, he can count on 10. Same thing with these meetings. I love a meeting if our behavior matches our buzzwords. Too often we come and meet, we get a couple of cookies, a cup of punch, and we fellowshipped. But we do nothing to move the needle. And then you walk out of here frustrated because we haven't seen progress. Well, it's because you did nothing after the meeting. So I don't like my time wasted. I was very selective about joining another organization. I studied and watched 100 Black Men, so I know that they move the ball, which is why I wanted to be a part of that. But the one thing I would just encourage everyone in coming to the meeting, please don't come if you're not willing to do something after the meeting. We'll mail you a couple of cookies. I'm very much so in favor of these new initiatives that everyone is throwing out there, and we say, well, let's have someone, we don't need police to respond to someone who's in mental crisis. We should not have police in our schools. We should not have police responding to the homeless. We should not have police responding to other things where a badge and gun can maybe be a partner in responding, or at least a secondary responder to some of these incidents until someone gets killed. Because it's easy in a climate-controlled room to say, well, let's just send social workers to talk to this man that the radio just put out, that there's a naked man standing in the intersection of Salina and Onondaga. Well, go there and get him out of the intersection. And this de-escalation that you asked me about in the use of force policy, try it on him. And then question that social worker on why the de-escalation is not working. I want to see someone else answer those questions. All of these things sound great in a climate-controlled room. Again, all of the easy problems have been solved. We've been to the moon. Easy. Solving the socioeconomical, public safety, racial issues in our society today, heavy lifting, and it's going to be painful before we get to our desired destination. Very much so. I am in agreement that police should have not been the primary responder for the examples that I gave you. I'm in very much so in agreement with that. The problem is even when we send a social worker to deal with the individual in crisis from a mental episode, where are we going to take them? You think that they have beds in our mental hospital that just opened up all of a sudden? No. And when we put police officers in the schools, you think we did that to help with algebra? No, they were out of control. We know why we sent police in there, and we know why we're very fearful about taking police out. So I think we need to have a very realistic conversation, reimagining what we do. I'm all for it, but let's be reasonable about it. Let's be incremental in how we attempt to approach it, and make sure that we don't unnecessarily put people at risk with this renewed energy that we have for something that's going on right now. And I'm very much so in favor of reform because I believe that we as a profession, some of this has been self-inflicted, and we're seeing the consequences of us not policing ourselves is why we're in this predicament.